Joining us this week for the Wednesday Bookmark is Trisha Davis. Trisha and Justin Davis are pastors, speakers, and the founders of Refine Us Ministries. They have 5 kids and live in Indianapolis. We're going to talk this morning about Trisha's new book, co-authored with her husband, Justin, One Choice Away from Change. Break the cycles that hurt your relationships and hold you back. Trisha, thanks so much for your time this morning.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Let's begin by going back to a very painful period in your life, which began in 2005. Regrettably, your husband had an affair with your best friend of all people. And this ultimately led you and Justin into a 4-year restoration process. What do you want to say, Trisha, about that time and what came from it?
It's such a great question. 20 years now since that event, it has been 2 decades of really God's truth unfolding with this universal struggle we all struggle with in our relationships, that wounds that go unhealed, we repeat. And so as difficult as that season of life was for me personally in my marriage, what it exploded on the external and the internal allowed us to begin healing wounds that we didn't even know that were there, that we continue to benefit from to this day.
Wow. You encourage us to confront our past, and it occurs to me that confront is a pretty assertive, but I suspect a deliberate word choice on your part. Put some meat on that for us. What does it look like to confront our past?
The reason that I love that you asked, that's such a great question, is what the word we usually put to it is we run from our past.
Mm,
So it's an active choice. And so to confront it is to almost stop where you are at and say, okay, no more running. I want to deal with my past for what it is. But what we talk about in the book is oftentimes when we ask other people about our past, there's so many different uh, vantage points, and some good, some hard, that it can even feel confusing. Even when you stop and go, okay, I want to look to the past, how others remember it is like, well, I don't remember it that way. And then what felt like a good choice just feels like very overwhelming and confusing.
In 2021, you checked into so-called trauma camp, as you refer to it in the book.
Yes.
It's a place called On-Site just outside of Nashville.
Mhm.
What led to that decision?
We have used our story for all these years to talk about finding God through broken relationships and how to forgive. And I really, by 2021, I felt like, man, maybe I'm a forgiveness expert because I have gone around the country. I've spoken around the world about this concept. And then in 2021, just an innocent dive into a family tree through ancestry.com revealed that I was not Hispanic, and my dad is Hispanic. And so it unraveled this whole other story of finding out. Oddly enough, both Justin and I, kind of in the same work, found out in the same week that our dads weren't our biological dads.
Wow.
So it was another story of breaking trust that would cause me to have to confront my past, to understand my present, and at the same time find hope and healing in the future.
In your chapter called Break the Cycle of Unforgiveness, you hit on misconceptions about forgiveness. Touch on one or two of those for us.
I think the major one that I know I personally have struggled with, what most people struggle with, is this misconception that forgiveness means we have to trust.
Hmm.
That forgiveness is free, trust is earned. They're two totally different conversations. You can forgive someone regardless if they respond. It's what Jesus did for us. He offered his forgiveness. He chose that before we even chose him. But trust is a two-way street. And you can't have trust without truth. And so although the history of my life that I didn't even know was hidden was revealed, for the first time, I was walking in truth. And so forgiveness is often, we think it as the finish line, and then we feel guilt and shame, like, oh, it didn't work. Like, I already forgave. Why do I have to keep forgiving? But forgiveness, another misconception, is like it's a one-time thing, and it's a
Mm,
process. And so forgiveness is the starting line to healing. It's very rare that it is the finish line, because forgiveness is free and trust is earned.
that's very well explained. In your discussion on fear, you lay out the following very interesting, I thought, rough equation. You say sadness plus a long period of time equals stuck in fear. Sadness plus a long period of time equals stuck in fear. Unpack that association for us between sadness and fear.
Sadness is an emotion that God's given us. It's processing, but it's meant to move us towards healing. When we get stuck in our sadness, it leads to, often feels like, helplessness, and helplessness can lead to hopelessness. And so there's fear attached in that of, what if this doesn't end? What if I never find joy again? What if my story is so messed up that I'm not going to have the second half of Job's life? And so fear isn't always a bad thing. We see in scripture all the time. I feel like every time an angel's involved, he's like, do not fear, because he knows that, fear at the core is going to cause us to pause, and it's going to cause us to have to make a choice. Are we going to lean into that fear and live afraid? Or are we going to live into that fear with clarity that something needs to change, but I get to choose? I have a choice.
One of your very last chapters is on breaking the cycle of shame. How does one go about identifying and then breaking a personal shame cycle?
Hmm. This is the one where I wish we had a solid, here are 5 happy hops to breaking shame in your life. But shame it's the misconception that you are shame. And so we label ourselves as that shame.
Hmm.
Conviction says, I've messed up, and that's real, that's truth. But shame says you are the mess up. It's our
Hmm.
identity. So one of the first choices we can make is to acknowledge just that truth, that you are not shame. You were not meant to live with that shame. I have a friend that says, shame off you. I'm like, that's
Hmm.
such a great statement.
Yes.
But conviction says, hey, I'm gonna address this. Like, this really happened, and I need to own up to it. But again, in that owning up, the difference between shame, it leads you to a place of wanting to hide, because no one wants to know, like, hey, I did this, I am this. Conviction says, I did this, and I am forgiven through this, and this is how I'm growing. It's the mutuality that growth can happen even in the deepest pain of our mistakes.
So good. Last question, Trisha. You say people often ask you if you would endure all the pain again to become the person that you are today and to have the marriage and the family that you now have. How do you answer that question?
It's a crazy question, right? Someone's going, oh, I'm ready for this. One way I explain it is, I lived with God with rose colored glasses. And from a theological perspective, you could say God's blessing, and there's truth in this, but I believed, my perspective is, love God. And probably because I'm a rule follower, that if you love God, do the right things, you'll live this up into the right life. And so I had a very narrow view of who God is. But when your life gets shattered and you put on shattered glasses, and it just feels like I don't even know where to look, the pain is overwhelming. But over time, what I've learned is that those shattered glasses become a prism of pain to see God's glory shining through. And so now there's still those broken parts, but the healing I see in it has allowed me to see God in so many different ways, that it's not the circumstances I wish to go through again,
Mhm.
but I would never give up who I've allowed to see who God is through that prism of pain, and the gift of allowing my story to be a story of redemption, that when I get to go first with God's redemptive story, it inspires others that that same redemption is for them as well. And that's a fight worth going through 10 times over.
Absolutely. One choice away from change. Break the cycles that hurt your relationships and hold you back. Trisha Davis, co authored with her husband Justin. our guest this week for the Wednesday Bookmark. Thanks so much. Really deep stuff. Thank you so much, Trisha.
Thank you.